Hey everybody, welcome back. This is SIC Talks number 61. I'm here with Sami Reiss, who is a man of many talents, I guess is probably the best way to say it, Sami. I would call you first and foremost a vintage expert, but even more so than that, maybe a historian, a newsletter writer, a guide to precious information, a podcaster, which is how we got in touch and I want to talk about. But does that cover it, or is there other stuff as well?
Say so. Most of the kind of way I pay my bills mostly is freelance journalism, and then there's other stuff, creative consulting and so on. But the most front facing stuff I do is the newsletter writing, the occasional podcast. I mean, really the one episode that I did that you listened to and we both dug, and it's pretty much it. I'd say
Well, I mean, like I said, man of many talents. It's funny because I do a breakfast, which regular viewers of the show will know, on Yes Please, on Wednesday mornings, called Breakfast Club, and I ran into a friend of mine who turned out to be a mutual friend of ours, Sydney Allen Ash, this morning, and I mentioned to Sid that I was talking today, and she could not stop singing your praises and was just was effusive in Sid is a real considered thinker, and she was effusive in all of the ways that made me fascinated for this conversation. And in fact, we got into a whole big discussion about your podcast and the reason that you're here. For those who are not regular viewers of the show, the idea of SIC Talks is that it's a companion to the SIC newsletter SIC Weekly newsletter that I publish every Thursday, which is a digest of developments that I think are interesting for marketing, fashion, so on and so forth. What I ask my guests to do is to look at the list of links in progress, pick out 4 or 5 that they think are interesting, and we use those as sort of framing devices for the discussion. But where I wanted to start with you, Sami, was around that podcast. So you have been making newsletters and creating content as Snake for a long time. In fact, I discovered you because my brother sent me your book and was like, you got to pay attention to this. Yeah. You're so would you start by just explaining what the book is first, and then we can get into the podcast?
Yeah. So I started the newsletter in kind of 2014, just as a way to kind of get my sea legs back and right on deadline. This stuff that I was interested in writing and the stuff that I was interested in my life pretty much was just, vintage American clothing. So just, jeans, some furniture, sweatshirts, Champion, military stuff, all that. And, I kind of got deep into it and sort of the attention that I think made those early newsletters pretty interesting, and which kind of showed up in the book, was that I was, half into it as a sourcer and seller, and I would sell stuff, and I had a booth at the Brooklyn Flea. I did like 14 years ago or whatever it was. But I was really mostly interested in the market there for that stuff was so new, and it was so kind of unregulated, and it was also very low stakes, that the stuff that interested me the most and came out in the book, which is that I wrote the newsletters pretty much twice a week for about 5 years. So it's all from 2014 to 2018. And the stuff that interested me the most is, like, what's something worth? Is it worth anything? It's how an item can be like $1, or it can be worth $500, and then you don't really get any insight to who the buyers are through eBay, and really just kind of teasing out those ideas. And now and so with the book, friends of mine who used to run a record label, now it's a press, Shining Life. And they've done art books, and it's a kind of archival press for a lot of U.S. hardcore fanzines and old magazines and really cool stuff, some fiction as well. And we just kind of turned it into a book. And my good friend who I work with and is a designer as well, my friend Nat, he just had this really brilliant idea to just turn it into a sort of visual document of, I guess, the web. And so every link that was in the original newsletter, and it was kind of hyperlink because that's the style of writing back then, just like kind of bloggy style, was, we would either screenshot it, and if the links weren't alive, and a lot of times they weren't, it would get a description. So what ends up being, it's just kind of this I guess, just sort of more of a visual archive of this newsletter. I mean, on paper, I guess a newsletter should not maybe be turned into a book, but I feel like this. I mean, really, a lot of it is, almost all of it is just like, Nat's kind of brilliant insight to making this thing kind of like a lively visual document. And it's just kind of more of a coffee table book. And you read one newsletter, you move on.
You kind of get the sense of it. Yeah. I mean, what struck me about that was the fluidity of form and the idea that, which I think is a very contemporary notion, that something created for a format can come to life as actively, even more actively, can be given new life in a totally unrelated and disintermediated format, and that was really cool. The other thing that yeah, no, of course, I mean, and my brother is a collector and a nerd as it relates to that stuff, so his endorsement of it rang highly, and so that was how I found you originally. And then another mutual friend of ours, from what I understand, Sam Valenti from Ghostly, who has been a guest on SIC Talks and is a good buddy. Sam, I think, highlighted you in one of his newsletters, or it's a fever dream for me whether he highlighted you in a newsletter or whether he just wrote me some rapturous email about you, or both.
Yeah, we did a thing. I made a playlist, and he did the thing where we went to get tacos and picked my brain a little bit, and he came up with this really kind of cool thing about what the furniture newsletters are about, what the book was about, and then how he kind of relates to, I think, collecting and ephemerality and a physical product, all that good stuff.
Yeah. So speaking of that, so the old newsletter was turned into a book and was more clothing and vintage and that sort of stuff. The new newsletter is really tracks the waves across live auctioneers and other sort of auction sites like that, and points people to the furniture and the fixtures and the design stuff that you think is most interesting. How did that start, and sort of how do you view your sort of point of entry there?
Sure. Well, I mean, really, the way it started is sort of the same time I was pretty deep into vintage. I moved into this apartment, and I needed to furnish it, and I didn't really know anything about furniture, but I just figured there has to be kind of good furniture out there. You didn't read about it anywhere. It wasn't like listed, and no one seemed to have it. Everyone just had grandma lamps or IKEA or whatever it was. IKEA is great, but I just sort of picked the brains of people I knew who were, resellers, or parents were, kind of antiquers, and just went to the Strand every weekend for like a couple of years, just like like a year, and would read every book. And then I just ended up furnishing my place through live auctioneers, through eBay, like a few years ago. And then I just kind of happenstance. I was freelancing, still am, for GQ. And I guess someone suggested, because they knew I knew a little bit about furniture, that I write about it. And then I started writing, and most of it, the kind of resurrection of the newsletter, which I guess a year and a half ago or so, or maybe 2 years ago, I was just kind of like, look, I did this newsletter. It was kind of a thing, and I should bring it back, and I want to do it in a sustainable way that keeps time for me to write about other stuff. And I just figured furniture, because, I mean, to be frank, some of it is I was sick of vintage and clothing, and then a lot of it too is it's like a never-ending deep well. There's so much stuff out there. We're really in the dark ages. Kind of, I know like a tiny bit. I'm not like, I don't pretend to be like kind of a font of knowledge, but I know a little bit. And it's just every week there's just like 3-4 things that were just brand new to me, and it almost it feels like a continuation of all the hidden in plain sight stuff that kind of grabbed me the most from the kind of 1.0 newsletter era. And
it's interesting.
Yeah.
Sorry.
To be honest, it was just kind of almost a mercenary way. I was like, all right, well, these newsletters are now this kind of thing. I was like, maybe I can find a way to like be the furniture guy or something, which is, and now there's a couple of us, a handful of us, like kind of working separately and like, tackling it. which is nice.
Yeah, so that's interesting actually, because I mean, nothing I like more than a great recommendation. Who else? I mean, I know you, and I know Fourscale. Who
Yes,
else is
he's kind of the main guy.
okay?
My friend MC Nanda has this a newsletter. I believe it's called Lotto, and she does it occasionally. Once a month, you'll get kind of a email from her, and it'll be Craigslist stuff or what have you.
Okay,
And then there's kind of the regular kind of design websites, but
sure. Okay, gotcha.
I mean, I don't read it. Well, I read a little bit of it, but it's for scale is kind of the other guy who people point out to me and who I've chatted with him. He's great.
Yeah, I'm a fan. I mean, no shade, but
Sure.
I prefer your style to his, rather, is what I was going to say.
Sure.
Just from a writing standpoint, I feel a little bit, I feel like I'm being talked to a little bit more than being talked at, which
Sure.
is, but there are people who are just like hungry for that information. Obviously, them, and so to
Yeah.
have that point of view is really,
It's in
it's
the air.
valuable.
Yeah.
That's right. So one speaking of that, or not of that specifically, but one thing that struck me as you were talking, I to tell you a little bit about me, I have no art education, but I am a big
Right.
fan of art, and have accumulated stuff over the course of time. And one of the ways that I really got an education on it, so to speak, was by going to Christie's in Midtown, or Phillips or Sotheby's or whatever,
Yeah.
during the Prince and Multiple sales, often,
Sure.
and just walking and trying to take in the volume of work. Is that kind of how you got your furniture education, through live auctioneers and that sort of thing, or did
Yeah.
you study design in school or something?
No, there was nothing formal. I don't really have a formal arts or anything like that education. I went to kind of school for political science, and I wrote for the college paper, but none of
Okay.
that. It was really kind of getting books. Like some of it was auctions, but really what it was there. Some of it was Instagram, but there really wasn't that much on Instagram. There would be
Mm-hmm.
like, I think, like two accounts, like a couple in New Mexico who had like a lot of space age furniture, and one guy who had like a couple of Japanese pieces. But it's really like going to a book, like opening a book, seeing what's in there, googling the guy, going to the two or three kind of furniture design stores that were popping in New York at the time. There was Bright Lines. I remember this was like 10 years ago, 10, 11 years ago, on Atlantic. Kind of there's the whole string of
Sure.
antique stores, but they're all kind of like wrought iron. It's a little not to my taste. Some of the stuff's great and antique, and it's very kind of somber. And he had this store, and it was just Gerard prints. And I went in there. I was like, "What's this?" And I think the woman working there was like, "Oh, I'll tell you." And this is, so you get into Gerard that way, and then it's just really kind of, without being cheesy about if your ears are open, if your ears and eyes are open, and you want to get into this stuff, you'll find it. And I had a nice 9 to 5 job. I had plenty of free time on my hands, and I had like a little bit of cash, so I was just it's just like what I did when I wasn't working.
Got it. Yeah. I mean, it makes, I guess I don't necessarily think of, and this is probably to my discredit, I don't necessarily think of the newsletter universe that you and I are part of as a function of capital J journalism. But to hear you describe yourself as a journalist makes a ton of sense, in also then hearing you describe that process, because that's what a journalist is doing. They're going
Sure.
in, they're listening, they're asking pointed questions, they're forming a point of view, and then they're reporting back on it. So that makes total sense to me. And then, speaking of investigations, and finally, after winding all the way around for 20 minutes, the the reason that the catalyst for me reaching out was this podcast that you did, right? The first episode of Snake Radio, which is about the market, or the lack thereof, in Beanie Babies.
Yeah.
Do you mind just talking about that a tiny bit? I mean,
Yeah.
everybody who is watching this should listen to it like as required reading, so to speak.
Yeah. I'd love to. Sure.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, it's so a friend of mine, Mary, and she's an actor and a writer and very talented. We've worked on stuff together. it came up in conversation that she had all these Beanie Babies, and she knew I would buy and sell vintage and so on and so forth. And she was like, all right, well, look, I have this stuff. I believe it's worth like maybe $100,000 or whatever it is. They all have the tags, and I was asking her the questions like, the main one's like, if the tag has a little bit of a dent on it, it's worthless. But all her stuff was pristine. And she was like, can you sell this stuff for me? And I was, even between freelance jobs, I like looked into it, I considered it. And then so just in kind of not my journalistic capacity, I just, reached out to people who sold vintage and so on and so forth. And no one would touch it. No one wants to sell it. You look up stuff on eBay and the kind of the finished auctions and the prices were totally mysterious. Nothing makes sense. And I was just thinking, now I'm even more pessimistic about it. But at the time I was like, well, there's got to be a market for this stuff because
Right.
there's this, Oprah segments and like Today's Show, and there's just all these magazine stories all the time about, or maybe not all the time, but quite often about, hey, Beanie Babies are worth all this money. And it was a real
Right.
thing in the 90s where they were sold as pre-collectible items. And Mary's dad, as well as I'm sure thousands of parents around America, were like buying these Beanie Babies as a way to just, kind of Mickey Mantle rookie card their way into, paying for their kids' college education. And then we looked into it, and basically it doesn't exist. I mean, maybe people are selling them, maybe people are buying them, but it's like not a market. And then it reminded me, and so we talked about it, and we kind of go into it, I guess, it a little bit more detail there. And it just, to me, it seems like, I mean, it's a vintage story one, but it's sort of the diamond market. There's this kind of really famous, like well-known journalistic piece. I think it's called like "What Had Ever Tried to Buy or Sell a Fake Diamond?" It's like an Atlantic piece from
Okay.
1981, and it still like gets traffic and so on. And it basically says like diamonds didn't used to have a certain value, and then the De Beers family started marketing them, and there's
Right.
absolutely no resale market. And I literally know this because I tried to sell a diamond, I couldn't get any money for it. But so it's this whole thing where, all right, it's just this, not smoke and mirrors, but it's just, I think it almost, it sort of has a footprint beyond the kind of niche, hey, this is, like a strange vintage product. It's just,
Right.
so as a kind of, these vintage markets are really interesting because if you have like, if you want to roll up your sleeves and you have the time, and if you kind of like work a little hard, you can kind of really, make money in a real way. And everything else has just been kind of smoothed out. And so as it goes with Beanie Babies, it's kind of the case with maybe all other things. It's just like a lot of the markets are just well, maybe not, but how would I say? There's always a little bit of like pomp and circumstance around the market as
Sure.
opposed to
Well,
like volume and selling and stuff.
sure. I mean, the marketing comes
Yes.
from these markets, right? It's like
Sure.
these are the marketing is the stories that are generated to transfer value from one person's imagination to many people's imaginations
For
about the
sure.
thing. But I listened to that episode and I loved it for a lot of different reasons. One, I had just watched that Apple TV fictionalization of the Beanie Baby story that Zach
Oh, no
Galifianakis is
shit.
in. I don't know if
Perfect.
you've seen it or not, but anyway, so it was just like it was top of mind, and I had some backstory on it. The
Mhm.
second was I love the style, right? I don't know if you recorded that over the phone or over podcast,
Yeah, over the phone. Yeah, it could
but
have
it
been.
was just like,
It could have been better, but yeah.
well, but it was just like the statement was the quality of the conversation is what matters, and what you take away from it is
Yeah.
is in the conversation. And I love that because I just believe that that's fundamentally the point of doing these sorts of things. And
Mhm.
then the third was I was just like, oh my god, there are so many things, and I am not, to be clear, a collector,
Sure.
but I am an accumulator of things that I find interesting and that I'm emotionally attached to, whatever. And they could be books, and they could be art, and they could be sneakers, and they could be denim. It could be
Yep.
whatever, like hats, vinyl,
No,
all kinds of
everything.
stuff.
Yeah.
And it's in all of, I accumulate it because I love it and I'm fascinated by it, but it is also done with the thought that this is a store of value. This is
Yep.
going to be worth something to somebody in the future. And listening to that episode, I was just like, I know that I can go to Discogs and give you a spreadsheet of value for
Yes.
vinyl that I have downstairs. I also know that if I tried to sell that stuff, there is a good chance that I'm not going to get anywhere near those numbers. How much am I fooling myself? And then it made me think, what are all the other markets that people are
Sure.
fooling themselves in? And we this morning at breakfast, we're talking about this conversation, and we talked about guitars, we talked about comic books, we talked about silver, we talked about art, we talked about furniture and all of these sorts of things.
Yeah.
And I like, on the one, I want to encourage you to go look at other markets, because I feel like
Thank you. Yeah.
there's something to it. But I also I'm fascinated by your thought about how wide it goes, because trust is fundamentally what underpins capitalism.
Yes,
right?
That's it. And it's, I think the kind of the Beanie Babies market is the most egregious kind of example of just it really just being an all middleman market. The item the item itself doesn't really have any intrinsic value. It just is like worthless. Maybe one person sold one thing for X amount of dollars, but really it's only a market if two people are bidding on multiple items. If it's one person or if it's one item, it's just not a market. And then the kind of thing that they kind of have two thoughts about that is, one, I think companies and people who manufacture stuff have seen that there's just this giant kind of collectible market. So what they've been kind of doing is making things, they've effectively been creating things to be collectible. So it's like, 20 years ago, you had the Nikes at, Foot Locker, and then you maybe had some strange limited Nikes that were sold to folks in Japan or, Copenhagen or something, or London.
Right.
But for the most part, that wasn't their business model. And then it turned out that these things started really selling in a really kind of high turnover way. And also it's like free marketing and these collaborations, and you build this kind of loyal customer base and stuff. So that's what's been happening. And then, so there's a whole, and the record industry does it as well, where it's like, I could, and you could, we could definitely sell our record collections on Discogs. It's just, you have a job and, I'm busy with work. It's a pain in the ass. And if you really amortize it, it's not worth it. So you have these middlemen where you either sell to a store and you get 40% of it, and some people, and they have knowledge and you don't. And also the Discogs price, it's not the real, in a way it's a real price, but a store also can't have that price, because there's the phenomenon of people are like, well, that store sells their stuff at Discogs prices. Like, why would I even go to a record store on a Saturday?
Sure.
I can, that's no fun. And then the vinyl industry now, they're just there are a lot of records that are being sold, that are being made collectible. So like, I don't know, Selena Gomez will have a new record and or a CD or a, digital download, but they'll come out with a vinyl record.
Right.
And that is what is keeping, there's a crazy 18-month backlog now at the 2 or 3 vinyl pressing plants in America, because of Shakira and Selena Gomez and Justin Bieber putting out these small runs, which I get, these whatever runs that make money, but they're rush jobs, and they're all done through middleman agencies and everything like that. So that's kind of really upended the record industry in a way.
Sure.
It's strange. And then I think I had another point that and there's also with comics, and the making trust is a giant industry too. So if you want to sell your comics, you can kind of sell them on eBay, but if you want to get kind of the quote unquote Discogs or eBay or whatever Heritage Auctions price, you got to get them graded, and there are competing grading, there are competing gradings agencies, and it costs, I think, a significant, I don't know, $50, $100 to get each comic graded. So if you got 100 comics, you spend a lot of money to make money, and it's kind of professionalized the whole thing. There's still, I don't think anything is as smoke and mirrors as Beanie Babies. like that. It's just, I don't, maybe there's just like nothing there, or it was, or God bless, and they still look cool. But yeah, all these, when you suggested, you were like, you should do more of these episodes on these things, I was like, for sure. But Beanie Babies is the craziest one. Now that you mentioned these other topics, I'm like, all right, yeah, maybe I got something here because
Yeah, it's so funny. It's like this, this topic just ping ponged around the table, and everybody had their own thing,
mm-hmm.
and none of them, like there's a guy he's sitting 3 seats over from me, and
Sure.
all he wanted to talk about was vintage guitars, and he's just like, I've spent so much time in vintage guitars, and I don't know shit about guitars. I don't care about guitars.
No, they're. I think a lot of it too is their interest. It's almost like the argument. I think the kind of explanation for these things is in some ways really, really boring. Is that interest rates were so low for so long that people just basically had free money. And it was a thing where, I mean, when I was laying out the newsletter book, I had one of the later newsletters in like 2016 or something like that was about Domino's made or Rolex made a few different Domino's Rolexes.
Of course.
And they would give them to, really, top 5% regional managers or whatever it was.
Sure.
And there was one where the actual logo was on the face, and it was like $4,000 at the time. And I was just marveling at how you're getting this Rolex, and it's just kind of the trashiest thing in the world. And now, long story short, they're like $15,000 now. All the watches have like kind of jumped up, and in the last year, actually, watches have gone down quite a bit. But I think and guitars too. It's just a lot. Some of it is because nothing is really made well.
Interesting.
Luxury these days. So almost another kind of simple explanation is, if you spent $2,000 on an old guitar, you were getting like $2,000 worth of guitar. If you go into Guitar Center and spend $2,000, you're paying the rent. You're paying for the Fender employees and the Guitar Center employees and this, which, like, God bless, that's the way it works. But people don't make enough money. Rent's too high. Like, I think everyone just has this internal compass that they're just like, we are just getting ripped off. Like, this is the way to do it, and you don't need to be a whiz to like see that you get an old. I don't know. I have an old guitar right behind me, and it's a Gibson. I bought it for like $1,000, and I God knows what it's worth now, but it's great,
Yeah.
But I also didn't know. I bought it because I needed a guitar. If I'd known, I'd have like 20 guitars,
Yeah, for sure. Well, I don't know. The whole thing I just thought was fascinating, and I asked you here so that I could encourage you to go make more of those shows so that I could listen to them more. The other reason, of course, that I asked was because I wanted to get your take on what you're reading. It is my blessing and my curse to be both able to and interested in reading across a really wide swath of stuff. I think you could broadly say are associated with markets of various varieties, but they're markets of different kinds. So I sent you a list of the stories that I'm going to include this week, and I was interested in the ones that you sent back, and I'd love to talk about them a little bit. And the one I want to start with was the vase that was found at a thrift store or a vintage store or whatever for $4 and was sold for $100K. Right. I would imagine this is approaching the ultimate come up for somebody in that vintage line of work, but it also, there's so much luck and serendipity and skill involved in all that. I wondered what struck you about that one.
Yeah, it doesn't get better than that. I mean, let me find the link. What was it? Oh, it was a Vanini vase, right?
Yeah.
It was a Carlos Scarpa Vanini vase and stuff. And so it's interesting because whenever you read these stories, it's just kind of like, wow, some people have all the luck. I don't understand how this happens. It's just like, how does someone distinguish, kind of one of these vases, or, the guy who found in Portland, I remember this 20 years ago, like he found a velvet underground, like acetate,
like a lacquer.
Like a lacquer straight up for the record that like no one knew existed, and it was like a live recording that no one had. And I think he sold it for like $8. I don't remember, a shit ton of money.
Right.
But so on one hand, these stories are just kind of unbelievable, but it's also like kind of picking apart. And I was like, how'd this happen? Is like, the interesting thing is, one, the girl was going to the kind of thrift every week. So
Okay.
she said she just like goes there all the time. And I think she had a day job, but that's what she would do for fun. And so when you do these things, it just, again, without being kind of too really spiritual about it, these things just like happen. Like the things
Yeah.
just pop up in your life. If you look, it shows up. And then two, she said something that was kind of really interesting, which was just like, I lifted it up and it was heavy. And then I noticed that the kind of pattern was a little different than the other stuff in the store. And I mean, without, kind of giving too much away, there are some kind of tricks of the trade that I do when I look for stuff. And it's just, a lot of it is tactile. Like that's how vintage sellers work. It's just like, if something, you compare an old pair of jeans to something made, after NAFTA, they're thicker, the weft is different. It's just, that's how she got it. And then, kind of speaking from personal experience, all the people that I know who keep finding kind of crazy shit are just really the ones who are just clocking it every day, thinking about it. They don't specialize in one genre. Yeah, I mean, I go to the FMU record fair whenever I can, and without fail, one of my friends, Chris, just always finds. And this is like a professional record fair. Everyone who has a table is a
Yeah.
dealer, and he always finds a record that he makes like $5,000 on. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's not always. It's happened like 3 times, and this is
It's
a room where like literally everyone has access to Discogs. Literally everyone has access to Google Lens. Literally, and there's like a lot of white space wiggle room for this stuff. So thrifts are
that's
different
so
now. It's neat. It's kind of this cool. There's a lot of kind of like, oh, everything's been smoothed out, and it's like, no, if you do that, I don't think you make enough money off this stuff to survive, unless you're really like a hustler. But
right.
it's out there for sure. Even
It,
in picked over markets like here in Los Angeles, it's not even like, this isn't even like an editorial. It's just, it's out there. It's just,
yeah.
that's it.
Well, it's funny. I mean, two things occur to me as you say that. One is the quote that you included in your newsletter last night, guys. By the way, Sammy's newsletter Snake is great and worth subscribing to. Test it in the free version as I did, and you will love it, and then you will end up paying for it as I am. The one thing you said in the email last night was the quote from Jim Walrod, the late famous interior designer and downtown tastemaker, who sees somebody walking out of a vintage store with an Eames rocker in the early 90s and goes, okay, it's over.
It's over.
30 years ago. It's been over for 30 years. And yet.
Well, he was thinking for a split second it's over. And then I think the rest of the interview is like, it's not really over. And, he would vibrate at a higher frequency. And I mean, you scroll down his Instagram or whatever, the stuff that he was putting out there in 2011, 2012 is just, it was falling on deaf ears then. And he would, I look at auction results every week, every day, or whatever. And this stuff, everything that, a lot of the things that are popular now, like the Ultra Fergola mirror or whatever, the big one that people are critical of.
The TikTok mirror, right?
The TikTok mirror, yeah. It was like, it used to sell for, I don't know, in the high hundreds, like 7 years ago. And this was also when it was at, what was this, at opening ceremony. I mean, it was also at opening ceremony like a decade ago, which was where like a lot of people went. So
right,
here's a thing where it's just like, it is sort of over, but I guess the one guy would go into the Salvation Army and he would find the Eames rocker, and Jim, RIP, would go in there and find, if he had gotten there earlier, he would have found the Eames rocker, and he would have found the Vanini base, and he would have found like 3 other things, or maybe that it was empty, but he would have known to go back the next day, and then he would have found something. It's like an aggregate for sure.
Well, but you said something that I think is interesting, undefinable, but definitely a part of it, and it also gets back to something you said a second ago. What you just said was that he was on he was vibrating at a higher level, which I think is a really interesting way of just explaining the fact that some people are just more tapped in to detail or to whatever certain serendipity or whatever it is, 100%. And that's a gift. But also you said the fact that being multidisciplinary and having multiple sort of, let's call it, fields of some expertise helps you identify stuff that maybe some of the specialists miss. And I think that's a real, I mean, A, I think it's a real thing. And B, I think it's counterintuitive. It's just counterintuitive enough that those of us who have it can continue to use it and explore that avenue forever.
Yeah, I mean, you can get really, really deep in a few different things. I mean, look, I will say, like, I know a little bit about records, but I wouldn't classify myself as an expert. I would probably be able. So that's why, in a sense, I don't find these $5,000 records at the record fair.
Right.
But I'll be able to, like, I don't know. I've thrifted a bunch of stuff in, you know, New York City retail vintage stores that, you know, you turn around and sell for, you know, 5x or whatever. It is a thing where it like, if it sort of speaks to, I think, maybe if you're interested in something and you want to put in the time and you want to look and you kind of like it, all this stuff usually comes out of people actually liking this stuff, then you'll do well. But then again, the kind of caveat is that even Jim, I don't think he made his way doing interiors that were like that were like pretty, you know, sometimes button up, sometimes out there. But even he wasn't like foisting his, like, the Venturi chairs that he liked on his clients. Like, you still, in many ways, you kind of still need a day job for like the kind of drier stuff. But this is all kind of, it just makes life better. It's self-edification, and then you get what you want for no money, and then you're spending your time as you want. And I think also eventually the two paths cross, and you do, you know, you start using your taste and your knowledge on the kind of, I don't know, Dow Chemical or whatever they call you, to do some work.
That brings me to one of the stories that you highlighted was the one about trends on Depop, and what you wrote me back about this story was, it's interesting. I also think it's a bit different, as Depop customer base is just so young and broke that they almost can't get corralled into trends, and that makes a ton of sense to me, especially having two teenage kids in the house.
Sure.
But also I wonder, you know, to what extent the opposite of that pattern recognition is interesting to you, right? In that, like, just total dumb luck or like savantish quality that comes from not knowing.
I mean, I think it's also a thing that young kids who are, you know, with screens and who are watching, I don't know, you know, videos of people walking around New York City in movies or whatever it is that kids that watch, everyone has a kind of high, very distinctly calibrated, like, you know, a stylistic kind of compass. Sure. So these kids see these clothes and they just, not all of them, but like they'll understand it and they'll see what they like and they'll see something on someone else. And I think the kind of, I mean, I don't know how, I should say, young specifically the Depop, you know, market is, but in my kind of experience and talking to other people, it's just like a lot of items are just bought. Not so much in eBay used to be, you would buy it on the label and the descriptor and, you know, the seller sometimes. And in Depop, it's just like, this is an orange shirt. This is like a cool orange shirt. And when you do these things, kids, they're kind of creative. And I don't want to kind of, you know, romanticize, valorize it too much, but this is what kind of young people have always been doing. And this is, it's sort of how the way trends really start, because the stuff that couldn't move, kids would always sort of buy vintage because they didn't have really any cash. You know, you remember when you're like 18 or 17, you're like rubbing two nickels together. And you just kind of out of necessity buy the shit that's at the vintage store, like, you know, Salvation Army, that like goes untouched, that no one wants. And it's why the strange, like, Paul Smith going out shirts are happening now, because I think probably like 4 years ago, some like 18-year-old, 19-year-old was like, well, no one's touched this. Wouldn't it be funny if I wear this? And God bless them. They're like young and cool. And it just like, that's, I think I have a vintage bias. So that's the way I see the kind of these trends happening, is more kind of coming organically from like a few young kids. But it's almost, I mean, there was that Malcolm Gladwell, like, right, the trend spotting article in like the early 90s, was
about hush puppies.
About hush puppies, with like fake popcorn, right? And that's how it was then. That's kind of how it is now. And it's just like, that's what influencer seeding is, in some ways, it's a way to kind of recreate that not organically, I
Yeah.
think.
Well, it's. I mean, look, having grown up skateboarding in the
Yep.
late '80s, early '90s, in its sort of lowest period, but then having
Yes.
then gone to work in entertainment and marketing, it's like, you know, why is Air Jordan what Air Jordan is? Why does Nike exist in the present day? You can make the argument that it's because they made too many Air Jordans. They got consigned to Big Five, and skateboarders bought
Yeah.
them cheaply in
Yeah, the Bones Brigade
1987,
photo. Yep, 100%.
Exactly,
Yep,
exactly.
that's it.
And of course, there's confirmation bias there for me. Like, I want to believe that the thing that I was involved in is important, but I think it's true, and it's funny, the going out shirts. I spent my last 2 years of college in '97, '98
Sure.
wearing those going out shirts,
Yeah.
not Paul Smith, but the Old Navy knockdown of the
Yeah,
day
of
at
course.
the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
What there are some changes happening though in that influencer paradigm, and one of the stories that you pointed out that I thought was, and you had a fascinating spin on it, which Sid, by the way, at breakfast predicted.
Cool.
But so was about Mr. Beast's chocolate bar.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
And so talk about that one. Why did that grab you?
It's kind of surprising. I didn't know who this guy is, and I think there was a profile story about him. I read it, and it was pretty interesting. And he's like the biggest YouTuber there is, and
he's the biggest YouTuber there is, and
Yes.
and also an icon of Gen Z / a
Yeah.
Philanthropist of his generation / a source of serious controversy because he's exploiting people, whatever.
It's all very strange. And I mean, I think those tendencies are just going to come out when you're making videos for YouTube, because you have to do all this like weird, stupid shit. But he makes these candy bars, and I think it's because so some of the stuff that I kind of cover and talk about, consult about, is like sort of the new, I guess, post-vegan, anti-seed oil kind of health movement, if it's called a movement. And I kind of do a lot of this stuff myself. I believe in it. But one of the things that kind of came up, I remember seeing, was that Mr. Beast has these chocolate bars, and they're actually like pretty good for a chocolate bar. And when I mean pretty good, it's just like, unless the labels are totally lying, and they might be, because that's the way it is here, you could buy this stuff in France, as in, like, you look at the ingredients for, I think it was his like Reese's peanut butter cup, like, ripoff, and it was like cane sugar, milk chocolate, peanuts, and that's it.
Right.
And then the regular chocolate bar was just like milk chocolate, cane sugar, and there's like a soy lecithin emulsifier, which isn't great, but if you eat this stuff once in a maybe blue moon, or not regularly, it won't fuck you up. Like, the whole premise is that if you get a Reese's cup here, and if you get it in France, the ones here Reese's cup are actually good. If you get some regular ass chocolate bar, it's made with high fructose corn syrup. It's made with all this stuff that isn't really food. So, and the movement to get this stuff into food is just, it's a little, I don't know, it's not all the way there yet. It's bubbling up. It's like specialty stuff that you will find at like iPad coffee shop. And so the fact that he does this stuff, it's crazy. It was like a pleasant surprise. So I was thinking that, I was like, well, if I see one of these chocolate bars, I'll buy it, because that's like the good stuff, I mean, and I say this, drinking, Mexican Coke right now. So sugar's not that bad, but it was shocking that he, that his chocolate bar is actually this kind of like non-poisonous, food.
Well, right, and that somebody who is celebrated for business in the contemporary late capitalism stage is somebody who's making a theoretically conscious choice to sacrifice margin for the benefit of 100%. Quality, or whatever the case is. Yeah, no. Go ahead.
There's also a lot of these kind of, I mean, there's a whole cottage industry of these like quote unquote healthy, non-healthy foods. So, like gummy bears that are like good for you, and they sell them at Whole Foods and stuff, or like Nutella, but it's better. And a lot of the times, the way these things have shaken out is they're always missing one thing. Like, I'll look and there'll be like canola oil in it. And look, the science on this stuff is not airtight. this isn't
Right.
stuff that I've written about, for GQ or Journal or anywhere that I write about that would like even frankly pass an editor's muster. This stuff I do myself, and it's just it's impressive that because there's a lot of other people who are making these kind of elevated, junk food things, and he
Mhm.
just like literally like kind of nailed it. That said, I wouldn't be surprised if in 5 years they were just like, oh yeah, it's made out of like rats or something. But that kind of goes without saying about everything.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and it's also interesting, right? Like speaking of Mr. Beast trade-off, it's the trade-offs that we all make,
Yes.
on a day-to-day basis. My wife sent me shopping for a Christmas turkey
Okay.
the other day, and I was like, I haven't eaten turkey in 35 years. I might not be the best person to go shopping for a turkey, but my family eats turkey.
Yeah.
I want to be useful in that way. Like
Yeah.
it's not a choice I would make for myself, but it's one that I can live with other people that I love. So, we're all figuring that out. How did you get into that whole, let's call it ingredient based interest? I mean, I grew up in a hardcore scene in Syracuse where everybody skateboarded and then became straight edge and then became vegetarian and then became
Yeah.
vegan.
Okay. Yeah. I grew
And
up in Ottawa, close to those, so I would go to shows.
okay,
So some of it was that just kind of I went vegan I think when I was like 15 years old, lasted
okay,
for like 6-7 years in the like pre kind of refrigerated soy milk era for a little
right.
bit. It was really
When it took effort and took planning and dedication.
it was a lot of work. It was like you'd have maybe you'd have French fries if you went out to dinner.
Right.
And I remember there was like a billboard for Silk soy milk, and I was like blown. I was just like, what's going on? So I think the kind of almost marginal line for veganism is if you went vegan before or after Bill Clinton or like the Netflix kind of documentary. Because if it before the meltable, there was this cheese. Vegan cheese didn't used to melt,
Sure,
and
of
then
course.
in 2003 or so, it started melting. So if you went before then, it was like really old school. And then there was the 5-year period. But I remember Clinton went vegan like 20 years ago, and I was like, what's going on?
Oh, I
But
didn't even know. I didn't know Bill Clinton. I had no idea about that. I
it
had
was
no
like
idea
a
about
whole
that.
thing. It was like, and then so it sort of changed because it was like an Earth Crisis outsider kind of Rastafarian, like Caribbean, like punk outsider like thing. And then now it's just become sort of become city elitism, which it's all right. But the way I kind of got into all this stuff is I worked out. I've always kind of worked out. And then I had this crazy ass surgery a few years ago, and I had to kind of get in shape so that my spine wouldn't get screwy. And
Oh
then
wow.
and then I just started writing about this stuff a little bit. I wrote about I got obsessed with Olympic weightlifting towards the end of the newsletters in the book, and so the last I think 80 pages, there's like these kind of ill-advised things, and basically it's a long way of saying it. So I've covered this as a little bit as a beat, and then I just read a book. It is this book, Deep Nutrition by Kate Shanahan, like I think a couple years ago, and I just sort of tried it all out for myself, and it helped me with my surgery recovery, and I felt pretty good. And then I think a few months later, I started seeing these guys like IG accounts and all the influencer stuff, and it was strange to me because I just knew it as these dry concepts in like a nutrition book. And
Right.
basically all these accounts kind of exist as threading out different sentences within her books to like as a tweet thread of just like, hey, this is why seed oil is bad, or hey, this is why water is better, or whatever it is. So there's a lot of BS in that world, but I'm kind of with it.
Yeah. I mean, look, dude, it's it's funny because Sid said this morning.
Yes.
She was like, he can tell you everything about vintage. He can tell you everything about furniture, and then suddenly he'll come out about seed oil, and then you sent me the links afterwards. I was like, yeah, actually.
No, that's what I'm like. That's what I'm really interested. I kind of really it's a deeper hole, I think, and it just touches more parts of regular life, and it's just
right because we eat actively every day, assuming that we're lucky enough to have the means to do so.
It's a linguistical challenge to write about it, and I think it's also a thing that can't really be written about narratively, because if you write about one topic in a magazine article, or like in a, I think it was in the late 80s, the Surgeon General had this big report on health, and they basically said that, dietary fat is like not so good. And they said that, and I interviewed, it was a Dr. Mary Nessel, who was like wrote it, and she was like, yeah, well, I don't want to misquote her, but the beef, like lobby had a lot of
the beef
influence.
board.
So they couldn't really say like, don't eat red meat, which I think you should eat red meat, but they couldn't say that. So they had to say saturated fats.
Yeah.
And then because of that, they came out with all these SnackWell things. So really, when you prioritize one thing in like a story or in anything, people are going to go over the top, and like the pendulum's going to swing way too much the other way.
Yeah.
It's just this fascinating kind of almost like technical problem.
But it's also our human impulse to sort things along a binary, right? It's to go, okay, well, if this thing is bad, then it's really bad, and it must be the worst thing that there is, as opposed to understanding the sort of the nuance and the grays. For sure. Yeah, it's interesting. The returning to marketplaces for a second. Yes. The other story that you highlighted was the one that Piers sent me about IKEA and the vintage IKEA stuff selling for $32,000.
Right.
And being in your, let's call it line of work, right? Or at least line of sort of fascination at the moment with furniture.
Sure.
What does that tell you about where things are going?
Well, it's sort of an interesting thing where I don't know if they had an auction specifically like this a few years ago, but I wrote a piece, I think, and I was looking it up before we got here, and I guess I wrote it in the midst of the pandemic, where it was basically vintage IKEA stuff was sort of going for a lot of money. And if you look at the archives, and the archives are a little tougher to find and a little less transparent than the archives for, I don't know, like Herman Miller or something like that.
Yeah.
Because they're, in Sweden and so on.
Sure.
Sweden. But there was always sort of this little baby kind of market of this stuff being sold. And they always IKEA also wasn't always what it was the last 20 years. So for a while, they were just kind of, shoulder to shoulder with a bunch of other, kind of Nordic furniture producers. And they had to roll the dice on, freelance designers, and, they had their own staff guys do stuff. And as they got more popular, and as their, model kind of really tacked on, they started the quality kind of went down, and the aesthetic kind of smoothed out. But really, there was they had the staff guy, Niels Gammelgaard, who's one of their designers, who I think made like a third or half of the things that were in that auction. And they had a couple other guys, and they just, within the, God knows, 700 things that they would make every year for the last, let's call it like the 70s, 80s, and 90s, there would be like a handful of items every year, which were like kind of, you would see it, Buy Right or Home Union. And even, Kat, who works at Buy Right, was sourcing, she got like these crazy Werner Pantone chairs. They're like 6 colors and look like a Garrett Rietveld, chair. And they have these like crazy, like Deco 1920s or 1910s, like angles. And I think it's really almost counterintuitive, and it's almost a shock to the system to be like, wait, this stuff is like from IKEA. So when you see that, you want to get it, Yeah. And I think that's kind of what drove up these prices. And then IKEA, I think they were doing sort of a heritage line, and they reissue some of these pieces here and there. But as with every reissue, it's never like, it's never 100%. And there are always people who want to, just own the original.
Yeah, it's funny. I looked at that story and was immediately reminded of the Virgil Abloh furniture that they did a few years ago, which felt like, okay, people want weird, rare, heritage, vintage, certified, limited, whatever stuff from us, and this is a direction we're going to go. And didn't really happen, which I don't think had to do with Virgil passing. It just kind of just didn't happen. It was it felt like a one-off. I don't follow it super closely, so you would know better than I, but I wondered whether you looked at that article and went, okay, this is going to be the penny dropping. This is going to be.
It's hard because, I mean, so, I really thought I had it figured with furniture. And the thing is just there are a lot of institutional or structural issues with furniture that just kind of make it a little less sticky than, other markets, which is one, I don't know how many people under 25 buy anything that they want, to be honest.
Right.
So it's just like, you just kind of like, you have adult furniture and, you have like shitty furniture and then you don't. And two, it's just the creative classes or markets or whatever that drive these things. You're in New York, you're in LA, real estate is expensive. You're maybe renting. If you're in New York, you have a small apartment. It's just hard to get these things. And there also are, I mean, I try and be positive about everything, but there's so much shit on Live Auction News. It's like mind boggling. If you want to go on it, if you want to like outfit your place in a year, then you put aside a few grand and you like go on Live Auction News yourself or subscribe to the newsletter or whatever. But on a big market scale, like there aren't enough couches made in the 1970s for everybody. It's not like Levi's jeans, So
sure.
I think it's one of these things where, and Virgil, I think was probably, he probably knew how to speak to executives better than probably anyone on the planet. So he was just like, and I was lucky enough to interview him once, and it's this thing where I was like, all right, I get it. And a brand has their own kind of motor and philosophy, and they're like, this is what we do, and he kind of keys in on that, and he's like, this is what I can do. And the stuff that he made for IKEA was like pretty cool, and it was good, and if he had made more, it would have been like better, and other people would have made it. And it's usually Virgil gets the first collab and other people get it. But I don't know if the penny's dropped yet with furniture. I feel like it probably will. And it's one of these things where we're like, when's the penny going to drop? And then it does. And then everything's different. That's how it happened with vintage and sneakers and like skateboarding and everything in the last 25 years. I don't think like vintage, I don't think furniture is that much harder. Everywhere else in America, you have a car, you have friends, you get someone to put the couch in the car. Like it's not tough,
Well, all right. So because we're coming up on the hour, and I want to continue. Then I'm going to pick up on that thread and continue in my, living vicariously through your business aims.
Sure.
Tack from the podcast earlier. You wrote a newsletter, and the free version of your newsletter last week was about who made great furniture this year. Nobody knows, because there is no defining body or version or metric or whatever the case was. And it was a fascinating piece, because it was just like, how could an industry this big not have something? And as a daily reader of DZine, for instance, like you think people are paying attention to this. Like, why is there not?
People know.
You can do it. Why don't you do it?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do it. It's one of these things where even while I was writing it, I was like, well, the real thing for me to do would just be, spend 30 hours and look and be like, what came out this year. And part of the answer is that I don't pay. I mean, I write about this stuff, for GQ and other places, and I pay attention a little bit to like, what's coming out now. But because I'm so focused on vintage and everything, I tend to think that the older stuff is, a little bit better. And also, although it is also an issue where, one, it's more that it's really hard to kind of get information about what actually came out this year. And I'm saying, like, I couldn't get it. I was like, did Noel make this year or last year or the year before, or so on and so forth. And it's because I think the industry, because the industry is so big, and because furniture is just almost everything, And because there's no kind of sort of elite enterprise like there is in fashion, where they have the CFDA awards,
CFDA, right?
and they have Vogue magazine covering it, and they have Women's Wear Daily, and they distinguish between different tacts and stuff. It's just sort of tricky, and that's not to say I don't want to do it, but I was kind of being like, I was looking, and then there is some stuff that came out this year that I like, and I think I'm a big fan of Lycan's new productions.
Okay.
They kind of made a sort of a desk that I think is near brilliant. They made a dinner table that's just like excellent, and part of it was I can't really just be like, well, the good shit that came out in 2023 was by Lycan. And that might be the answer. But it was also a thing where I've looked in the pieces that I put in my kind of newsletter every week. I sort of believe in more than the stuff when I have to look up and do an assignment where it's like, this was the best stuff of 2023. Because for the most part, also, it's sort of a price thing, and maybe this is coming out of punk, hardcore upbringing, where I'm like, as good as these items are, if they're like $18,000, I can't really, with a straight face, recommend it to someone. I mean, and I think that's what is probably going on in AD in these magazines, and it's
for sure,
pages, and it's also, God bless, and look, a lot of it is. In many ways, a lot of people who buy the furniture are designers, or excuse me, interior designers who are buying them for clients.
Of course.
In that case, the budget is totally different, and it makes sense that these things cost $18,000 for a sofa, because if you're not selling X thousands of them, then that's what it costs.
Right. Well, and also if you're sending it, sorry to interrupt you, but you're selling it to somebody who is post-economic and has no price sensitivity at 100%. All.
Yes.
So it's like, it's the same. It costs $1 or it costs $45,000. It's literally the same thing.
It's the same thing to them. And it's also a thing where it's like, hey, you're doing an AD spread, or it's like your place has to look a certain amount of nice to live up to the investment that you made in the real estate that you have. That's like going by the thousands, maybe not now, but over the last 5-10 years or whatever it is. Yeah. So, and it's just, it's almost like, there are tourism prices where it's, everyone on the plane is paying a different, fare.
Yeah, of course.
So just like that one guy can get the ticket for 100 and 300 and that. So as if it's someone else's money, it's always like that. And I think what's happened is that kind of consumers are a little bit left out in the cold. And then even thinking about all this stuff, that said, look, I like NPR emails. If anyone's, listening at the 50-minute mark or whatever it is, bring it on. I'd love to, kind of do this. But it might just be one of these things where it's like, okay, well, 2024, we had 5 really great things.
Right.
And 2026, we'll have 7. And I think maybe that's what it might be. There are a lot more people making furniture now that is interesting. But a lot of it is on a kind of
commission basis,
made to order, art adjacent way, where it's kind of got more to do with Bruce's Gallery, I think, is one that is kind of good movement, and the work of Gaetano Pesci, which is the wall rod champion really early on, and just it's kind of it skirts the line. Yeah.
What do you think of somebody like Martino Gamper, who takes some of those impulses and then makes them a little bit more mass?
Oh, really? I might not be super familiar with them, to be honest.
I mean, this is it. I just talk until I stump my guest, and then
there you go, you win.
We end the show.
1-1. Yeah.
No, Martino Gamper is cool, or at least I think he's cool.
Sure.
My lens on it is less substantial than yours, or less articulated. Well,
I mean, my philosophy on furniture in general and all this stuff is just, buy stuff, take chances. If you like something, it's good. And it's just there's no correct aesthetic. And I think it's sort of something that I tease out in the newsletter, but it's really our understanding of fashion as like consumers is quite advanced. Our understanding of, a lot like music, film, cinema, a lot of aesthetic spheres is like pretty high up there. And then furniture, we're just kind of in the Stone Age. So because of that, it almost seems like, could it be that, we don't know anything? And it's just so to elevate your taste, you just kind of got to roll the dice, make mistakes, and you go maybe, and you get like a limited IKEA thing. They were like, oh, what was I thinking? It's like, no, it's actually good. And then that takes you to where you want to be. And I think whenever anyone's like, should I get this? I'm always like, yes. Yeah, why not? Like if it's like interesting, and then you get sick of it after 6 months, and then you sell it, and it's a liquid, it's like a liquid item,
right. Oh man. Well, listen, Sami, it's been such a pleasure. It's super fascinating. We could go on forever, but I do want to be, try to stick to it to the hour for both the audience and our respective schedules too.
Sure you go.
Thank you for spending the time. Just, again, everybody, by the way, will still be listening at this point. So,
right on.
For since everybody is listening, the newsletter is snake.substack.com.
Yeah, just snake.substack. Yeah, I bought the URL off this. I had Snake USA, and I bought the URL off like the Satanist in like Wales or something like that. And you have to go on. We FaceTime. He pushed the button while I was on for like 50 bucks.
Amazing. Yeah. It's like trying to sell a ticket to a show on Dice to people who aren't in your phone. Anyway, I did that once. It was the whole thing. Anyway, so snake.substack.com, Snake Radio, which is the single episode, but soon to be many more episodes podcast in that same zone. And then we should look for your writing in GQ, Wall Street Journal, sounds like, and then any other projects.
On Essence, and then I've been very slowly kind of building up copy content for a kind of separate, maybe I guess a little less occasional newsletter about health, strength training.
Cool.
It was called Leg Day Observer, and it's going to be that. So that'll be coming out in like the new year, and then I'm always available through the newsletter to talk shop, consultancy, business, all that good stuff, which is actually like what I do most days of the week.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. All right. Well, folks, look, give Sami a shout. He's an excellent correspondent, and as you can see, like an unbelievable font of knowledge. So, well, Sami, thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate it. Thanks everybody for tuning in, and we will catch you around the interwebs and the Live Auctioneers site.
All right, dude. There you go.